AI Action Summit in Paris, co-chaired by Prime Minister Modi and French President Macron, emerged a disruptor to the global hegemony of US and China in the AI global ecosystem. India, in fact, is going to be hosting the next AI Action Summit. What are the likely changing geopolitical equations, with India attempting to front the cause of accessible democratic AI and tech in the context of the global south? With open source AI systems that Prime Minister Modi emphasized should be without bias and enforce trust. Interestingly, US Vice President Vance backed Prime Minister Modi at least on 2 counts about AI jobs, where he said he agreed with Prime Minister Modi about how AI would not replace humans or take away jobs, also adding to what Prime Minister Modi demanded about AI models without bias. Vance added ideological bias to it, before taking a veiled dig at China, warning countries partnering with authoritarian regimes that he claimed sought to infiltrate, dig in and seize information infrastructure of others in what would otherwise be a cheap big tech offer, possibly from China. So what does this mean for India? Can India be a global disruptor? Remember, when it comes to AI penetration, look at these numbers. India is almost 2.8 times the global average, higher than the United States, and is home to almost 16% of the world's AI talent. But when it comes to the AI race, it's way behind in the global AI share, even in the context of China's latest DeepSeek versus US open AI conundrum, with no machine or foundational models to boast of. That's the status of India. So how much should and how should the Paris summit be really looked at? I'm being joined at this point by Dr. Michael Owens, who's the president for US Global Center for Cyber Policy, Vijay Thirumalai, who's a founder and CEO of GoldWater Technologies, Manish Barriar, who's a political analyst, Lloyd Mathias, who's a business executive and independent director, as well as Pawan Duggal, who's a cybersecurity expert. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining me. Well, first, Lloyd Mathias, let me just straight come to you, because you also have your, you're very closely linked to this ecosystem as well, Lloyd Mathias. A lot has happened with the geopolitics over the last few years, for that matter, particularly the last 24 months have seen relations change. We've seen wars in a way that this generation has never seen before. And when Prime Minister Modi goes on to say that India, in fact, that AI is writing code for humanity in this century, we are at the dawn of the AI age. This possibly is not unknown. This is becoming more and more the reality. But how do you look at the geostrategic relations really change vis-a-vis what's unfolded in France? I'm asking you this particularly in the context of the Cold War, literally in the AI ecosystem that seems to be going on between the US and the China, and then you have players like France and India trying to gain more space.
Thank you for having me on your show, Sneha. I think the geopolitics of artificial intelligence has begun to play out. I think fundamentally we're looking at 3 streams. The US wants completely free access, right? So very clearly what the US is saying, that we don't want to hold back the spread of AI. It has to go completely, and quite naturally so, given Musk's big role as far as the US administration goes. Europe is seeking to regulate, right? Big concerns for Europe is really about regulation. They've been doing it even with the old tech majors, but certainly with AI, they're seeking to regulate. They're also seeking to invest, seeing that they're falling back on the race. And China is really taking the lead, in a sense, with semi-state-sponsored access, right? So the growth of a lot of Chinese tech majors, indeed, and DeepSeek as well, could be directly linked to the state access that the Chinese ecosystem provides. I think in this context, India is emerging as an important player by default. By default on two counts. I think one is the size of the Indian market is too large to ignore. For tech majors, even outside of the AI context, if you look at all the global social media platforms, India is either number one or number two, right? Whether it's Alphabet's platforms, Google, Gmail, whether it's Meta's platforms, Facebook, Instagram, whether it's Mr. Musk's Twitter, now called X. I think India is too significant a player. And I think a lot of Western technology firms recognize that China is virtually close to them, right? You do not have free access to a lot of these big social media platforms. So India's sheer weight of usage is big. But when it comes specifically to AI, I think India is nowhere close in the race when it comes to developing a foundational AI. Right? So you have DeepSeek in China. The US has always been the leader with OpenAI. So I think India is not in that race, but India is clearly playing on the strength of its numbers. Clearly playing on the strength of its numbers and the fact that in this summit, the 60 countries who signed this, I think India is co-lead with France in terms of trying to develop a balanced ecosystem in terms of the rules of engagement of AI. Though tragically, though the US and UK haven't signed this, but I think it's a good step forward.
And that's a very important point to really ponder upon. Dr. Michael Owens, if I can get you in. So US obviously is not the signatory. You have a new administration completely coming into US. What's the signals that US is giving? US was part of this summit. It's been seen as a very important summit with partnerships across countries, for that matter, for accessible democratic AI. And then you suddenly have US that's not a signatory in a larger ecosystem where US seems to be pulling out of various systems. So how do you look at US positioning today? You had the Vice President back what Prime Minister Modi has said, take a whale, dig at China, but largely questions also in how US is looking at all of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show today. I think there's a couple of different aspects we have to look at this. First of all, obviously within the U.S., we've had an administration change with President Trump and Vice President Vance coming in that, is in some ways, I see some continuance from the previous administration, only really in the ways of understanding how important of a partner that India is. And we saw that back with the Quad back last year, when President Biden had the prime minister in the United States. But we've also seen some departure with what was just kind of mentioned earlier is that, I think this administration is going to take a much more direct approach, even though China was not mentioned by name. We know that China is definitely within the crosshairs of this administration, and to call them out and talk about authoritarian regimes and the real concern about, the use of surveillance and censorship and social control, I think is right on task for where this administration wants to be. And obviously with the power that Elon Musk has shown, having an emphasis on free and unbiased AI, I do think that resonates with global democracies and emerging economies, not just India, because as mentioned before, India's numbers and sheer population mass is clear, but also talking about other smaller countries that I think in some ways is also proving as a way to disrupt potentially what China's growth in this space is going to be. So I do think though that this is somewhat of a proxy war, and that talking about the disparity that we see in with China's push to that closed system is something that America wants to keep that gap between the U.S. and China.
So then how do you explain the fact that US decided to not be a signatory to this? Being present there, speak about it, garner alliances together, but not be a signatory. How do you really interpret that?
Again, I think this is part of this new regime coming in. And if you look across the board at what President Trump has talked about doing, obviously he's not truly a fan of these global partnerships on many levels. I think the president wants to be seen as someone who is in fierce control of dictating where the U.S. goes. Now, I'll take my personal thoughts outside of that, but I think that's a large part. And remember, too, this was Vice President Vance's first foray onto the global scale, so that I really think it was about trying to position the U.S. In a way that holds above signatories from a global partnership, because I truly believe that following true with what President Trump has done in the past, He has not been a friend of these multinational accords and agreements.
I think that in itself is a huge signal, and as you said, it's US positioning itself, and a lot of questions would also emerge out of it, that if you are positioning yourself above the signatories, then what's really the democratic axis that one is really talking about in this particular case? Vijay Thirumalai, very good evening. Good to have you again on this show. One of the things that all countries spoke about, that Prime Minister Modi spoke about, that JD Vance agreed to, was AI is not going to replace humans. The humans have the key to the future, and job losses is not going to be staring at the face, if I can just rephrase it in that sense. But just let's look at what the estimates suggest. And this is according to SEO.ai, that AI may replace around 800 million jobs by 2030. 120 million workers need to retrain themselves in the next 3 years. 45 million jobs might be overtaken by 2030. 14% workers have experienced job displacements already. And even as I'm giving these data, the fact is, let's look at what's happening across companies which are AI dominant or not. Let's look at Meta, let's look at Amazon. I mean, countries across the board, for that matter, are seeing a lot of laying offs. And many of them are attributing this to AI. So when Prime Minister Modi says what he does, when JD Vance goes ahead and backs what Prime Minister Modi says, as somebody who's very closely associated with this field, how do you look at the international statements?
Sneha, pleasure to be here. Always great to be on your show. Couple of things, right? If you look at Google's latest earnings, Sundar Pichai made a comment that about 30% of Google code is written by AI, right? So that's actually, and a frontier company, Google, is saying that is actually cause of alarm bells, right? And we do a lot of work with cutting edge founders. A couple of things, they're not hiring as much as what they used to hire earlier. So unless we move from the value chain of being the back office to something more frontier, I think there is a lot of pain ahead, especially the GCCs and the back office work and what is called the application development, ADM, right? Which is what the IT services company used to do. So that's going to be in a lot of pain over the next 4 or 5 years if we don't level up, right? So, and I want to make one more point about China versus India and US and the whole thing. This is unrelated to the job loss, but I've been a big bear of China. Bear as in, I don't believe that DeepSeek was able to build what it built at $5.5 million, etc. Like you said, it's state funded, and even the markets feel the same way. Meta, Amazon, Apple are at all-time highs after the DeepSeek fiasco that morning, right? And I have positions in all of them. So I don't think what China is saying is true in terms of their capex efficiencies, in terms of your AI efficiencies. I think it's far from true. The market feels the same way, right? So I don't think the war is lost with respect to AI war, with respect to India and China, and probably even China and US. And secondly, I think US, if you're seeing it, but DeepSeek has been banned from Google Store, Apple Play Store, etc. I don't think they're going to take this lightly. They lost the manufacturing wave to China. AI is not going to be lost. I'm a big bull of AI, both from US and India. I think India, there's some amazing companies in India doing some phenomenal work, right? Sabam AI doing some work in terms of foundational for India-specific AI, right? So I think if this is a 20 over ODI,
which is still in process.
This is the first over of ODI with the first over. It's still a long way ahead. One thing of concern I will tell you is that because we're in the global mobility space, one thing of concern is a lot of Indian founders are actually not setting up deep tech AI companies in India. They're actually headquartering in US and moving to US because they believe that's the place to be in. That is of concern. So you see smart IITians moving because they are saying India, they're not able to raise they're not able to raise the capital they want. They're not able to, markets don't reward them. So that is a cause of concern, right? So, and I pointed out earlier as well, Perplexity may not be as successful as they are today if they were an India headquartered company, right? Sure, there's Zomato, there's Swiggy's who are very successful. That's a different kind of company. But a deep tech AI company may not be as successful as what they are today if they're in their headquarters. So that's a cause of concern. That's something which we collectively need to do to see how we can make them more successful, right? So that's something which I would really work on if I were the government to see
I
how
think
we
let
can
me get in
enable.
Manish Barriar at this point. Manish Barriar, please come in. I think Vijay Thirumalai is making some very important point, and even as India positions itself as the voice of Global South, here's a person who's first-hand saying, look at the companies that are starting deep tech companies. They are preferring to be outside India. They're doing so, they're preferring to do so outside India because they do not think they have the environment to do so in India. Even as India does position itself, seek to position itself the way it is, this does raise questions and concerns about what the ecosystem is within the country and how the government and the country needs to really have a relook at it.
Good evening, Snehaji, and good evening to all the co-panelists, and thanks for having me here. So I would humbly differ from him. Obviously, he works very closely with the industry, but whatever my understanding is that the government has taken some of the very important steps to ensure that the right kind of environment is here. And if you look at any technology for that matter, I think India has always been a very good user of technology, and from there we have built companies, very large companies. Let's take up Infosys and TCS. While there is some sort of innovation, but we were very good and very agile when it comes to application of these technologies. Now, it is not hidden from anywhere that we are not an R&D hub. And AI is still that stage where it requires a lot of research and development. Unfortunately, our R&D is somewhere around 0.6% of GDP, and there are other priorities for this country also. But I wanted to point out that some of the government initiatives that has been there for a long period of time, you would know that this year itself in budget, although 500 crore is not something very big, but we did establish something which is very significant, a Center of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence. And there is a fund of funds which Government of India has proposed of 20,000 crores. But if you look at the AI ecosystem here, we, Indian entrepreneurs, I think you have Kritim by Ola and some of the, most of the Indian IT companies as well as Indian entrepreneurs, they have latched on this bandwagon. I would agree with my previous speaker that yes, when it comes to what he was talking about, deep tech AI, that capability, where we can get something like OpenAI, that still is not there. But I think we are doing some really great work in that. And, the Prime Minister's speech today, I would rate one of the best speeches I've ever heard from an Indian Prime Minister and from him itself. Because he talked about Global South, he talked about collaboration, he talked about really, taking this AI to the entire world and really, taking to each of the countries. Remember what India did with vaccine diplomacy. I think India can take a lead, and the Prime Minister has really taken this leap forward. So I would agree on some parts, but I think we are growing. And once we see a very big market, I'm sure a day will come where we will see those companies out here.
Vijay Thirumalai, do you want to respond to what Manish Barriar has said? Manish Barriar has said that the government is doing a lot. He's also spoken about what the budget has done. But again, to get a sense of what you were saying, that what's missing? What's missing? I mean, that's one question that everybody asks. India has some of the most deep AI penetrators. India has some of the best skilled manpower when it comes to even tech for that matter, AI as well. But what's missing for all of it to start off within the country, vis-a-vis for the Indians who are going out and doing so much more?
So, first place, I'm not bearish on India. I think India can be, I made a tweet as well. If, let's assume US is that the AWS equivalent, let's say China takes even the second place, which I'm not sure, but let's assume even China is the Azure equivalent, India can be the Google Cloud.
It does. It takes second space. It does.
let's say, and India can be the Google Cloud for AI, GCP of AI, right? So we believe we have a very, very strong niche, and we can be the third player, and that's a significant pie in the global market. Having said that, I think it's not just the government collectively. Let me ask you this question, right? I put a poll out as well. Will Perplexity be successful if they were in India? It's not that they couldn't have built a Perplexity from India, but it's not yet built so far. But the team is largely Indians, etc. Right? The CEOs Indian. So it's not the government needs to do such, but the markets as such is not that deep enough. You're not having investors who can take that long a call to cut the dollars, etc. So cut the check, etc. So that's what is lacking. For example, the numbers what Mr. Manish told, that's not contextual. We have Stargate, which is few $100 billion, and India's government investment is like 500 crores. So that's not, so put in the context of capex, we're not doing much from what needs to be done from a global scale, right? Obviously, we don't have that kind of resources, but we need to have some uh, deep government sponsored R&D, which is actually gives, like, that's what China has done. China has had universities who's actually funding for the private companies, right? So that's what we need to do, right? And maybe the second thing what needs to be done is actually have an SEZ kind of approach what we did for manufacturing for AI, right? Where they have tax breaks, where they have incentives, etc. That can actually propel India's AI journey.
Okay. All right, Pawan Dugal, if I can get you in. Now, US and China are the big contenders. They are the number one and number two when it comes to the market, the global market share, as it were. India is far behind both of these two countries, even in terms of R&D and the money that's involved. I think India is globally in the number 7, if you look at it. But my question is very specific. US has a very private-led policy. Private companies-led policy. China has a very government-intensive policy, government-backed policy. Where do you see India today placed? Because obviously India is still shaping its policies. It's not largely private-driven. It's still stimulated by the government. But how do you look at this shape up for the country, considering there are a lot of concerns about data sharing, all of these things taking a very different global picture?
Well, clearly, India is in the process of making up its mind what it wants to go. It's oscillating between both the two ends of the spectrum. But the kind of stand that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken today has actually catapulted India onto a different level of thought leadership. Now, for the first time, you have the Indian Prime Minister, you have some leader in the world talking about sustainable AI. Till now, it was all about intelligent AI, responsible AI, accountable AI, but connecting artificial intelligence to sustainability, both of the ecosystem, both of the environment, both of organizations and individuals and society is a marvelous concept, because that is effectively mirroring the hopes and aspirations of developing countries and least developed countries. So I think India, without much ado, can straight away jump on into becoming a global thought leader in terms of the legal and the policy ramifications of artificial intelligence. Let's remember there's no one international treaty on artificial intelligence yet. March 2024 saw the UN adopting the first resolution on AI, but that was again very limited. Now, this kind of a declaration that's come up from the AI Action Summit has actually gone and broken new ground. And I think if India can actually go ahead and ventilate these kind of positions, that India can actually become a catalyst for thought leadership. Needless to say, India has lots to do. Minister Ashwini Vaishnav has already announced that India is working on its new foundational model, but we need to do far more. We need to have dedicated legal frameworks in India. We need to have enabling legal and other frameworks so that the adoption of AI can be given far more impetus. We actually need to encourage the AI innovation ecosystem in India. But while all that's going to take time, there's nothing stopping India from becoming an advocate, a thought leader on the legal and policy ramifications. And when we are connecting artificial intelligence with sustainability, we are actually proposing a much, much bigger concept than just responsible AI, transparent AI, or accountable AI.
Michael Ovens, if you would want to come in at this point to what Pawan Duggal has said, that sustainable AI is possibly a concept that has been championed for internationally at such a level for the first time. Would you agree with him on that? Dr. Michael Ovens, my question is to you. Okay, I think we have some connection issue at that end and we'll try to sort that out. But Lord Matthias, do you want to take that question, Lord Matthias? When we are looking at sustainable AI, now if that's a concept that India is really mooted, and as Pawan Duggal says, it's possibly at the international level for the first time in a way that India has done so, you have a country like US that is a very close partner and champion with India, but refuses to be a signatory. So internationally, how is this going to be seen? Because, you know, you've had a lot of summits when it comes to even climate change for that matter, which has all been a wish-wash on the paper with no action really on the ground. So how much of this is really going to be at that realm rather than see anything strategically move forward?
Sneha, I'll agree with Pawan Duggal to a large extent that it's good that India has kind of walked the moral high ground, and together with France, Prime Minister Modi and President Macron, together have kind of led this initiative of the concept of sustainable AI. So they've talked of AI beyond just the technology aspect. They brought the human element, the responsibility, the fact that AI has to also take humans along and can't just be AI for AI's sake. So I think that's a good and a positive development. But I would say that would have been India's in any case. Like I said, the sheer scale of India being a democracy and the fact that, you know, our internet penetrations have reached, what, 70-80% of population. And in any case, we represent about 16 to 17% of humankind, right, with 140 crore people. So I think India is too large a player not to be part of any global policy making, specifically when it comes to technology. Now, layer on top of that is the fact that India also has a hell of a lot of technology manpower. Both Vijay Thirumalai and Manish referred to the fact. But I think in the context, I would say two things. I think one, we will always be very important to the world just because of our scale, to the technology world, given that China is close to a lot of global platforms. India is too large to ignore, and therefore global platforms will kowtow. The US will work closely with India, aside from the fact that they haven't signed this for various other regime changes, issues that are such.
Not really so from a leaders or a production
the
perspective.
Second point, absolutely. I think, therefore, on the second front, we have a long way to go. Let's be absolutely clear, the world is quite polarized. In terms of foundational model, in terms of advancement of AI, there are two clear leaders in the world. The US by far, and with what deep tech promises to do, backed by the Chinese state funding, I think China is pretty much up there, right? So I think these are the two broad areas. Europe is struggling to keep pace, but Europe is focusing more on areas like regulation. I think for India, the opportunity really is not to go and chase our tails, but try to build real deep foundational models. I think use the strength of our technology manpower to build actionable AI, use the foundational models of the global platforms and create newer products based on AI that can be game changers. I think there is room for that. I think that's the path that we should lead, simultaneously with what Prime Minister Modi has done today, which is taking the model high ground, because there are a lot of issues where AI can be counterproductive. And the fact that we are sounding the alarm bell on that, I think, is a definitive and a positive step forward.
Okay, Pawan Duggal, very quickly, a minute or two to you. Do you want to weigh in on when countries like India and US speak about AI without bias? For a layperson, what does that mean? Because in, say, a human context, in geostrategic context, biases are very clear. In cultural context, biases are very clear. But when you say AI without bias, what does that mean?
AI without bias is a utopian dream come true. If you're expecting artificial intelligence to be not having a bias, then you are effectively thinking about the stars and the moon. The fact of the matter is that today artificial intelligence is nothing but the cognitive intelligence of machines. Now that machine cognitive intelligence is constantly getting refined thanks to big data sets that are being used for the purposes of training these AI models. So, for example, a large number of the AI models from the Western world do not have adequate Indian data and consequently are not well equipped to deal with Indian nuances, Indian cultural and societal mindsets. At the end of the day, when I look at China, it's a different ballgame altogether. Now, when I look at DeepSeek and I ask DeepSeek, who are you? DeepSeek says that I am an AI surveillance system. So no wonder the algorithm is getting crystal clear and telling you I'm no longer just a generative AI, I'm an artificial intelligence surveillance system. So once it's a surveillance system, its bias is going to be distinctly different from one system which is primarily only in the form of generative AI. From a layman's language, it's the ability of machine to only learn in a limited manner from the databases, from the huge data sets that are being used for the purposes of training the same. Well, in America, they found out that AI began to start thinking that the white skin was superior to black skin and started coming up with some conclusions that were completely contrary to logic. But then that was because of the different and errant kind of big data sets that were fed therein. In the Indian context, we have a bigger problem. Most of the Indian models are still working on millions of parameters. The bigger international models haven't trained on Indian data much, and therefore the chances of the AI system discriminating against Indian values, Indian mindsets, Indian thought processes and Indian perspectives is going to be high. Hence, the kind of the magical wand mind set of Indians that AI is the next new magic for every other problem in life has to give way to far more cogent recognition of the fact that AI is going to err. So it's that not that two-liner disclaimer says AI can make mistakes, please check information. It's much beyond. We'll have to start looking at the fact that AI is hallucinating. And when hallucination combines with bias and discrimination, you have a deadly cocktail that can have immense number of ramifications. Hence the need
this is
for
very
building
fascinating,
in legal,
and specifically
safeguard
for viewers
and
who may
guardrails
not be really well versed with the way you are combining words which otherwise would have been very human reference words to explain AI and bias is going to be very fascinating for viewers who are not very well versed with AI as such. But Dr. Michael Ovens, is this also one concern why US is keeping itself away? Because obviously one of the best ways to deal with bias and with AI is large data sets, large data, and with that comes in the control and the privacy issues. For many countries, you know, earlier it used to be very different, and now it's being said in no time it's going to be whoever owns the maximum data has the maximum share of hegemony, as it was. And is that one of the big concerns for US to ensure that its hegemony continues?
No doubt that weighs into, I think, the overall equation. When you start talking about the largest companies that are out there or the models that are being created and the sheer amount of data that is being collected. I mean, but it does lend itself to the bias and the ethical AI challenges and risks that we see and how it can lead us forward. Now, in the US, always it's going to be, we're looking at how do we continue to innovate and how comes to be more innovative. And the contrast of that is having a really closed environment or very detailed state-ran privacy laws that the U.S. doesn't have at the same level other countries do. But I think when we look at this as the U.S. pushing forward, I think it is an important point that was made earlier about how the private sector and the venture capitalist market continue to push AI, and coupled with the massive amounts of data that is being collected. But I think there's some very good points about this that we have to look at, which is the positive aspect of how AI can happen. There is a concern about jobs being lost, but new jobs undoubtedly are going to be created. There is financial aspects, there's healthcare. There's so many areas where AI can be a positive outcome for the entire world. When you look at places around the world and how do we address homelessness and famine and many other things, I think it's lost in this conversation about the fears and concerns. And yes, as a cybersecurity expert, I'm always looking at the potential for the doom and gloom, if you will. But I always want to remind everyone that besides just being a huge economic engine, what AI is, it also has the capability to do a ton of good around the world.
Okay, Mr. Matthias, I'll come to you for a minute. It's interesting because Dr. Owens actually said this. He said this, US does not have very high standards, very strict laws to ensure privacy. And when India debates its privacy laws, it often makes references to US. How do you look at this?
I think it's a matter of context, right?
Partial correction there, Sneha. A lot of India's...
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Lloyd Matthias. Dr. Owens is saying it's a matter of perspective,
I think
but go ahead.
A lot of Indian privacy laws... Yeah, I would say two things. I think one is a lot of Indian privacy laws and how our data protection bill has largely been crafted on the lines of the European GDPR. Right? So in that sense, we've kind of raised the European standard as the gold standard, which in very, very many aspects it is. On the US approach to AI and technology in general, and more specifically and in the context of the new administration, I think a lot of it is a hands-off approach. It's like the equivalent of what Musk calls being a free speech absolutist. Right? The US believes that if technology is good and people adopt it, that's good enough. Right? The value systems accompanying it do not matter. And as, Vice President once said today clearly, he's kind of worried about ideologically led AI or technology with a clear inference to China to a large extent. So I think the US has a hands-off approach. And when you talk of India's privacy laws, we're largely kind of modeling it around European GDPR.
All right. Okay. My last question to Manish Barriar as well as Vijay Thirumalai. Vijay Thirumalai, first to you. Both of you actually the same question. Vijay, what's your one big takeaway from this AI summit? Firstly, do you even see it with credence and credibility? Do you see it make any change? If at all, what's that one big takeaway? If nothing, you could say nothing.
I have zero takeaway. I'll tell you why. Somebody asked Macron, I think Ruchi Palki asked Macron, why is France believed to lead the AI race? He said, because we have nuclear power, right? So I think the relevant players in this AI race are just India, China, and US. Europe is an irrelevant player. They come up with more regulations, right? They have not produced any AI company of value, which can beat the world companies in US and maybe China. So I'm not a big, I'm not a tracking this closely. This is more of a headline grabbing thing, but I don't think it's going to have any material impact. But what I want to say is the positioning what PM Modi has actually done is very interesting. Responsible AI is a niche which nobody has taken. And like every company, you need to have a good positioning. India has taken responsible AI positioning. That is a brilliant positioning for India, right? So love that part of the summit.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Manish Barriar, a minute to you.
Yeah, Snehaji, I would use Pawanji's word, thought leadership. This is something which India has been known for thousands of years, and I think India has taken a lead in that. It is a matter of pride that we are amongst the top 4 or 5 countries of the world who is on the global stage and we are talking about something which is a game changer for the entire humanity. People say it's a wheel or a fire moment or electricity moment for this humanity, the way internet was. So it's not something which is like, just a small thing. And more importantly, when Prime Minister speaks on a global stage, I think the Indian youth, the Indian industry gets the right kind of a message, and you will see its positive impact in years to come.
All right. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us. Dr. Michael Ovens, thank you very much for your time. Vijay Thirumalai, thank you very much for joining us. Manish Barriar, thank you for joining us again on this. Lloyd Matthias, thank you so much for your time, as well as Pavan Dugal. As always, thank you very much for joining us on these issues. One thing is for very clear, even as India tries to emerge as a voice for Global South, yet again, being a disruptor in this ecosystem may be a long-drawn map for us as a country. Time for a very short break. On the other side, news and updates.